Chapter 1. A few things you will need. Firstly, you will need patience, and a lot of it. Do not expect to get it perfect the first time, maybe not even the second. But with a little practice, the knots and techniques presented in this guide will become second nature to you. Second, you will need time. Making hemp jewelry can be a bit time-consuming while you are learning. Taking the time to learn and practice, though, is highly fulfilling. Very few materials are needed to make hemp jewelry. A few strands or a ball of hemp, scissors, some beads, optional, are the only major requirements. Hemp is easy to find. It can be purchased in almost any craft store or online retailer. If you are purchasing large quantities of it, online shopping usually tends to be cheaper. Though one ball of hemp, somewhere between $5 to $10, makes several long necklaces. So, if you are not making jewelry to sell, it is usually not necessary to go out and purchase hemp in large quantities. One thing I keep handy at all times is fabric glue. I always recommend using fabric glue to secure knots at the end of necklaces. It is not a necessity, so if you do not have it handy, do not let it stop you from making jewelry. However, the next time you are out and about, you may want to pick up some. Make sure that it is clear drying for obvious reasons. You can find fabric glue in pretty much any craft store or chain store. It is usually with the sewing materials. Tools that will make your life easier. As I said before, all you really need is scissors, hemp, and maybe some beads to make jewelry. Having some tools on hand, though, can save you a lot of time and hassle. Here are a few things that might come in handy. Bead reamer. A lot of the time, especially when you purchase beads in bulk, you will find beads with obstructed or irregularly sized holes. You can use the bead reamer to remove obstructions or make the holes in the beads larger to fit your hemp. This tool works best with wooden and plastic beads. It can be used with caution for clay. I would not, however, recommend its use for glass or stone beads. The picture above shows some pretty common obstructions that I have run into while making jewelry. These have been especially common in wooden beads, but they are easy to remove. Even higher quality or more expensive beads are going to have some imperfections. It is just something that has to be dealt with, a fact of life, you could say. So it is best to be prepared for such things. In times when I did not have a bead reamer handy, I have been known to scrape away these imperfections with scissors, a knife, or whatever was nearby. Be careful with the scissors and knives, though. I hope I do not need to express why. Though from the nicks and cuts I have gotten, maybe someone should have expressed this to me. Clasps. Clasps can be used to make your jewelry look more professional. You can also use them to make your jewelry adjustable. I have never really used clasp in my jewelry, but they are an option and a must for many. I am of the opinion that clasps give a more store-bought appearance. I like for my jewelry to retain its handmade and rustic charms. Duct tape. If you can't duct it, forget it. Isn't that how the saying goes? Duct tape comes in handy with those pesky strands that need to stay still, especially the middle strands that you are tying knots around. If you do not have a board and a couple of nails handy, just duct tape the ends of your strands to any surface. It works in a pinch. You might even find it preferable. Choosing your hemp. The picture below shows a ball of thin hemp, also known as 2 millimeter or 20 pound. Thick hemp versus thin hemp. With so many types of hemp to choose from, where do you start? That is all a matter of preference. For me, it was easier to start with thinner hemp strands. It was easier to grasp the thin hemp and easier to pull my knots tight. The thinner hemp tends to have fewer uneven spots and slightly less fraying as well. Or at least it is less noticeable. So you are not quite as likely to run into trouble spots with knotting or beads. Using thinner hemp also makes finding beads easier, since most chain stores carry a wider variety of smaller beads than larger beads. Thicker strands do have their advantages, though. For one, it is easier to see the knots you are forming and to keep count of the knots. When adding beads to your jewelry, keeping count of the knots is very important so that you have symmetry. Otherwise, you will end up with a lopsided piece that will not wear very well. One thing to note, The thicker your hemp is, the more length you will need for your jewelry. The thicker hemp will make much larger knots, taking up more strand as you work. Waxed hemp versus unwaxed hemp. For most of my jewelry, I like to use natural unwaxed hemp, with the exception of the fishbone knot, but more on that later. Again, this is just a matter of preference. I like the look of natural hemp and do not usually mind the occasional frayed spot or little unevenness in the thickness of the hemp. One very slight drawback to using natural hemp is that your jewelry may seem a little stiff and scratchy on your skin at first. Not to worry, the natural oils in your skin will quickly soften the hemp. If you wear the jewelry while bathing or get it wet a couple times, it will soften even faster. One advantage to using natural hemp is that it can be dyed before use. Dyeing for me has proven to be time-consuming and a lot of work, but worthwhile when I cannot find pre-dyed hemp in the color I need. If you want your jewelry to have a cleaner look, for example, no frayed strands, you may want to use waxed hemp. The waxed hemp has the benefit of more even thickness, so normally you will not have to fight to get a bead over the occasional lump in your strand. A disadvantage, though, is that if you have to back up and undo a couple of knots, it is much more difficult because waxed hemp sort of sticks to itself. I am not particularly fond of the wax stuff because I do not like the sticky feeling on my hands. It reminds me a little of getting glue from a glue stick on my skin, though I don't notice it so much during wear. The wax stuff is also a bit softer when first crafted. Dyeing your hemp. A lot of beautiful jewelry can be made with natural, undyed hemp, but dyeing opens up a lot of creative possibilities, as well as pre-softens your hemp. Again, this only works with natural hemp. Waxed hemp will not evenly absorb the color, if any color is absorbed at all. Start with a large bowl or basin, depending on how much hemp you want to dye. Mix the dye according to the directions on the package. With most dyes, vinegar can be added to or used instead of water for a brighter shade of color. A lot of times, the package will specify how much vinegar to use. If the package does not say, you can always call the company's customer service line to be sure before using vinegar. It is a good idea to lay a protective cover over your work before you start. You may even want to do your dyeing outside to avoid the possibility of permanently staining your floor or countertops. Always wear latex gloves, as the dye will also color your skin and the color is not easily washed out. Think back to how gorgeous your hands were the last time you dyed Easter eggs. Soak your hemp in the dye mixture for at least an hour. Rinse thoroughly and allow the hemp to dry. It is very important that you rinse well. Otherwise, the color may bleed onto your clothing or skin after you have made your jewelry. You may need to repeat the process once or twice, depending on how dark or bright a shade you want. So, wait until your hemp dries before you throw out your dye mixture, as you may want to reuse it. It does take quite a while for the hemp to dry, so be prepared to wait. Some of my best results have been with sun drying. In the winter, however, sun drying may not be an option. You can throw up a clothesline type setup over the bathtub and hang your hemp there. I have done so with some rope, string, and even hemp and a couple of thumbtacks with good results. Hang your hemp and let it dry. This works best if you have a fan blowing on the hemp, but it will still take a while to dry. If you only have one bathroom, this method could be a problem. Another option is to use a clothes dryer. Use a low heat setting for drying your hemp. Be aware, though, if you decide to go this route, you will have to clean your dryer very well before drying any clothing. You will also have to spend a good amount of time untangling your hemp. If you do not own a clothes dryer and can't dry your hemp over the bathtub, you could use a hair dryer to speed the drying process a little. It will still, however, be time-consuming. Choosing your beads. I always find myself lost in the bead aisle of any craft store. It is one place I have to really discipline myself with money. Otherwise, I would walk out with a bag full of beads and no paycheck. Yes, my bead addiction is that bad. All of the beads look glittery and pretty on the shelf, and I love glittery things. But the beads might not look quite so glittery and pretty once I get them home, especially in lieu of a paycheck. So I have to go into the craft store already having an idea what I want. I may not know exactly, but I have a plan for color, shape, and size at the very least. It is always better to overestimate the size of your beads than to underestimate. This is because of the sometimes uneven thickness of hemp. For good measure, I usually take a few strands of hemp I will be using when I choose my beads. I make sure that the beads do not fit too snugly on the strands, so that I can avoid the problem of being halfway through a piece and then having to start over because the beads will no longer fit. I learned this the hard way, though in most cases I can get through with a bead reamer. When using natural hemp, having a stock of wooden beads always comes in handy. I usually buy these in bulk because they come in so many different colors, styles, and shapes, and are so versatile as filler beads. Because one package of wooden beads contains so many different sizes of beads, I have the choice to use different sizes of hemp. Plus, wood materials are much more environmentally friendly than the plastic stuff, so long as they are harvested responsibly. I have a thing for natural products. For me, nothing beats earth tones, natural hemp, and natural-looking or hand-carved wooden beads. If you plan to sell the jewelry you make, keep the cost of the beads in mind. Remember that the more the beads cost, the more you will have to charge for your jewelry. So think cheaper bulk for the most part, but do not sacrifice quality. You do not have to spend a lot of money to make great jewelry. Being able to keep your prices reasonable will help you to sell more jewelry to a larger variety of people. Save the more expensive stuff for when you have made a little money, or to sell to a smaller group of people who want specialty items. Protecting your hands. Hemp jewelry making can be pretty harsh on your hands. You want to keep a check on your fingers as you work. When I first started making hemp jewelry, I ended up with a lot of blisters on my fingers. As I pulled my knots tight, the hemp would rub against my skin. Much of the time, I did not notice until my fingers started to itch and hurt, because I was so engaged in what I was doing, and because the rubbing was so subtle. At that point, I already had little raw spots on my fingers, a bit like carpet burn. Eventually, my skin got used to it, and now I do not have such a problem with burns. When out of practice for a little while, though, I have found that wearing Band-Aids or medical tape on my fingers helps keep them from getting rubbed raw and blistered. Duct tape will work just as well if it's all you have nearby. Chapter Review. All you really need to make wonderful jewelry is hemp and scissors, maybe even a few beads. Fabric glue is recommended throughout this guide. It is not a necessity, but I strongly recommend it to keep your end knots much stronger and less likely to unravel. Having tools on hand, such as a bead reamer and duct tape, will save a lot of time as you make your jewelry. If you can't find the color of hemp you desire, dye it. Choose your beads carefully. Think size, price, and versatility. Try to take a sample of the hemp you will be using with you when you are bead hunting. If you can't, remember that it's always better to get them a little larger than you need them than to wind up with beads that are too small to work with. Be mindful of your hands. The constant pulling and tugging on hemp can leave you with blisters. Use Band-Aids or medical tape on your fingers if this becomes a problem.